So over the last 5 weeks, this is the sixth in this series, and this is the one I think you're going to summarize and deal with some questions. But over the last few weeks, you've been helping us to understand the meaning of the shadow in our psyche, in our lives, how meditation helps us to discover it and to live with it, or to dance with it, and you've helped us to see how this work opens up deeper levels of self-knowledge, deeper levels of consciousness, and you've shown us also how the Christian mystical contemplative tradition has understood this dynamic of the spiritual journey and human development very early on, quoting Evagrius from the 4th century last week. So it's been a wonderful journey with you, and help us to bring it together and give us a push into the future. Thank you.
I'll try. I'll do my best. Well, in fact, all you who are listening have done extremely well. We have been spiraling through at least 4 levels of consciousness. We are ordinary, rational consciousness with the thoughts guided by the ego, and 2 levels below, both still under control of the ego. And we've gone once in a while up, guided by our intuitive spiritual center. So you've been traveling. I deliberately actually say we've been spiraling through these levels, because our journey is not a linear one. At different times, thoughts from different levels or feelings from different levels come up. So it's a constant spiral. And that goes through for a long time. So we looked at Evagrius last week, and he and Meister Eckhart, in fact, our brothers at prayer. They're so similar in lots of ways. And they describe the map of our spiritual journey similarly. Do you remember Evagrius said self-knowledge and glimpses of the divine was the first stage and would go together. And then Meister Eckhart adds to this that often we're given an important spiritual experience right at the beginning. And in fact, you've been meditating perhaps 3-4 times, and suddenly this is there. And I think that's the Spirit saying, welcome. You've joined the path, and go on, I'm here with you. And it encourages us to follow this difficult path of self-knowledge. It isn't easy. It sure isn't easy to face what has been so nicely suppressed all these years. But the beauty is that becoming conscious of these suppressed feelings and unmet needs, and then letting go of the resulting false self-images, is an essential step on the spiritual journey and incredibly freeing. Every time you go on, you move more towards freedom in the spirit. I've got bad news. We won't get rid of our conditioning, but once we recognize our unconscious drives, even a little bit, and we name them, do you remember the importance of naming? They lose their hold over us. We see them and we can laugh. That's so important. I mean, you asked me to do these talks. And I said, okay. So I went to Shankar and I said, I can't do that. I've never done anything online. I can't do this. And he started laughing. He said, hello, there is little Kimmy again who can't do it. And so we both laughed, nodded at this conditioning coming up, and of course then just did it. So you can't, and I'm not 19 anymore, but even then it is still there. Now, so we can't get rid of it, but they become not so important. We recognize them and laugh at them. Laughter is the best defense. Jung said, because then, what then happens is what Jung says, become what you have always been, wholeness, which we always were without knowing it. Now, isn't that a beautiful incentive? But John Main in The Door to Silence, emphasized one danger on this path of self-knowledge we have to take good note of. He said, it's very easy for people of our generation to see everything in terms of self-improvement, self-understanding, and so forth. In fact, of course, this fascination that we have for looking at ourselves can be disastrous for the spiritual journey. There is a danger for us that we can come, as it were, entranced with ourselves by our own mental operations. The essence of the experience of meditation is not self-analysis, but self-transcendence. That's something to keep in mind because, oh boy, this is a powerful ploy of the ego. Ooh, isn't this interesting? Don't you want to know the causes? No, just accept it is there. You don't need the causes. And the ego thinks it's interesting. Yeah, so do you. No. Do not confuse self-awareness with self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is a real barrier on our journey. Self-awareness, on the other hand, with its connection to the true self, can help us to transcend the self-consciousness. Well, listen to this poem of our story, I suppose, of a centipede. Think of yourself as a centipede. The centipede was capable of running very fast. One day it was asked, how can you keep all your feet under control? Never getting them crossed, never stumbling, and at such speed too. And with what leg do you actually start to run? The centipede began to think and found he did not know. He went on thinking, trying to find out. To no avail, still busy thinking how he could no longer move and died on the spot. Now, you won't die, but you will certainly be led up a blind alley. So remember the centipede. As we have said before, and it's worth repeating, we have a choice. We have a free choice. We can listen to these messages of the ego, or we can listen to the compassionate voice of the self in the silence. telling us whatever we think, we are already a beloved child of God. Thinking has to give way to intuition. W.B. Yeats said, "The journey into the inner self is not just the important one, it is the only one. We need to listen to the sound beyond the silence." Isn't that a wonderful description of meditation? Listening to the sound beyond the silence. The more we enter the silence and stillness of meditation, the more we recover our intuitive understanding of our true divine nature at our core. And we begin, and that's important, we begin to integrate this with our rational consciousness. We need both. By allowing each to inform the other, we bring together the mind and the heart in balance and in harmony, and our behavior is guided by both. All we need to do is pay attention, listen faithfully and lovingly to our prayer word being sounded in our depth. And the Spirit of Christ will grace us with insights and bring certain aspects to our attention. Do remember, though, this does not happen because of our own will and effort. There is nothing to achieve. We're already there. Will, effort, achievement are aspects of the ego. And really, the ego is no help here at all. Our only task is to be open to the insights given and to reflect. Remember Evagrius? Reflect on what we're doing and why. Living with other people is very annoying and very helpful. And there I would say, think before you act and meditate before you think. You ask for yourself, if someone says something, is this justified? Is this true? Okay, if it is, fine, deal with it. Otherwise, is a button being pushed in you? And is the situation really as you see it? Well, in the 10 seconds before you react, ask yourself, is there one of my unmet needs sitting on my shoulder? And which one is it? This is the way to transformation. And the beauty is that any modern day psychotherapist would agree with Evagrius, 3rd century, 4th century, that insight gained for analyzing our thoughts and our actions before we act, perhaps, is crucial in resolving conflicts and can be led to understanding. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. Well, yes, that's true, but sometimes they are just irritating with no projection going on. We can't take it all on ourselves. If you think this is rather self-centered, is trying to achieve self-knowledge, well, the first one is once we see some of our own actions and reactions, we actually see them mirrored in others. And we then feel compassionate towards them. Oh boy, They went through similar experiences I did. And then our thoughts change. And you remember thoughts, how important they are? So our loving thoughts towards others can influence them. This is the level we can all reach, this trying to understand. And in doing so, we become aware of the divine essence in everyone, everything, and we become very conscious of our interconnectedness, our oneness. Yet, we're still in the world and very much part of it. It is the level of the contemplative inaction, which most of you are. And we start acting more and more from our own spiritual center, and therefore out of compassion. What also happens at this time is that the appreciation of nature deepens. You see things you never saw before. And when we sit still, just contemplating nature, we're taken out of ourselves. And the beauty of our surroundings show us the light of the underlying ground of being. It just shines through and sometimes overwhelms us. And then our experience is one of self-forgetting awe and wonder. And it's experience. It's in spiritual experience, not in belief and dogma, that real knowledge of ultimate reality is given to us. I'll tell you a story of I think it must have been my first television program I ever watched. I wasn't too keen on television in my early years. There were better things to do. But I remember one program, which was Dr. Jung, or professor he was at the time. It was in 1959, a BBC program, 2 years before his death. And you'll be interested to know, Lawrence, that the interviewer was called John Freeman, perhaps a relation of yours somewhere along the line. Now, he was asking him all nice questions and then asked about Jung's religious upbringing, because his father was a pastor. And he said, oh, yes, we went to church. And he said, did you believe in God? And he said, oh, yes, of course I believed in God. And then the interviewer smiled and said, do you still believe in God? And I will never forget that smile that lit up Jung's face. And he said, I know. I don't need to believe in God. I know. And that's what will happen. We then move beyond and transcend to the level of spiritual reality that's the source of all. This is what John Main called the level of silence, where we see with wonder the light of our own spirit and where we contact the ground of our being. Now, at this level, we do still sense things, but without our ordinary senses and unrelated to the environment in which we find ourselves. In fact, Origen, who is one of my favorite theologians, and also was a favorite with Evagrius, he spoke about spiritual senses. And he said it's a different way of perceiving totally. And Meister Eckhart agrees with him and says, There we hear without sound and see without matter. And furthermore, when we become more intimately aware of the divine, there's even a different sense of tasting and smelling and touching. Absolutely wonderful. But at this point, you thought you had left the ego behind, had you? Well, the ego digs its heels in and says, this is as far as I go. You've done your best trying to make him feel him or her involved. You're integrating mind and heart, but he or she refuses to let go of what it takes of its finite, separate entity and remains an obstacle on the path. Only when its fear of the unknown slowly evaporates can it finally let go of this idea and realize it's not going to be left behind. It is an integral part of our whole being. I've got to tell you this story of one of my counselees. It's an elderly lady I counseled for many years. And she described this process to me. She came one morning and said, Kim, I had the most amazing dream. Do you remember we've been talking about the ego wall I couldn't get through? That wall was there just straight in front of us, and it prevented me from moving on. Well, do you know what happened last night? The wall of the ego that prevented me from moving on reshaped itself in front of my eyes into a bridge across the remaining gap. And she said, I experienced love's embrace when I crossed the bridge. Now, isn't this beautiful? The ego, the wall, becomes our helpmeet and helps us to cross the bridge into the beyond. So I challenged her a little bit and said, so are you going to stay there now? And she said, oh no. I've got to return from my mountaintop, from across the bridge, and I've got to go and help others. I can't stay there. We've got to help others. And do you remember Father John Lawrence saying, the only yardstick in the progress of meditation and contemplative prayer is an increase in love for self and for others. And that was so obvious in this sweet lady. So it's fear of the unknown. Well, I will finish this series of talks again with one of my stories, and that will perhaps help. Once upon a time, twin boys were conceived. Weeks passed, and the twins developed. As their awareness grew, they laughed for joy. Isn't it great that we were conceived? Isn't it great to be alive? Together, the twins explored their world, and when they found their mother's court that gave them life, they sang for joy. How great is our mother's love! She shares her own life with us. As the weeks stretched into months, the twins noticed how much each was changing. What does it mean? One asked. It means our stay in this world is drawing to an end, said the other. But I don't want to go, said one. I want to stay here always. We have no choice, said the other. But maybe, just maybe, there is life after birth. But how can that be? Responded one. We will shed our life cord, and how can life be possible without it? Besides, we have seen evidence that others were here before us, and none of them has returned to tell us that there is life after birth. No, this is the end. Maybe there is no mother after all. But there has to be, protested the other. How else did we get here? How do we remain alive? Have you seen our mother? Said one. Maybe she only lives in our minds. Maybe we made her up because the idea made us feel good. So the last days in the womb were filled with deep questioning and fear. Finally, the moment of birth arrived. When the twins had passed from their world, they opened their eyes and cried for joy, for what they saw exceeded their fondest dreams. That is birth, that is death. And meditation helps us to release fear and grow in hope, trust, and love. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kim, for speaking. What wonderful stories. And how well you weave these stories into very profound and enlightening ideas. But through the stories, I think the ideas come back to us as questions and personal insights. So thank you for your wonderful gift of teaching.
But sometimes I think if I only said the stories and not my words, that would be all right too.
Well, I don't know about that. I think you need both. It's a dance. You need the stories and the ideas to tango.
There you go.
Could I just ask you a couple of questions to conclude?
Mm-hmm.
These wonderful windows that you've opened for us into self-knowledge and self-acceptance, and to see, as you've said, how meditation is not about self-analysis, but about self-transcendence, fundamental truth that we need to be reminded of. Anyway, one question that occurs to me about the shadow, as you've described it. In meditation, we become aware of the shadow. You can't sit and meditate properly, by which I mean you can't sit and meditate and take the attention off yourself, which is the essence of meditation, without discovering the shadow. And that can be both exciting and also a bit worrying for us at first. It's not quite what we expected. But what are the signs that might make us aware of the need to meditate, and that would push us into undertaking to develop the discipline of a daily practice? So in other words, what are the signs that the shadow is repressed?
That's a nice one. Well, we all know these very gentle souls. They never lose their cool. They never get angry. They never shout. Nothing, they're always there. And suddenly, someone says something, and boy, that is a volcano. And they can seem furious. You just look at them and think, who is this?
Mm.
And then afterwards they said, I'm terribly sorry. I don't know what came over me. Well, it was their shadow, which they suppressed so strongly that the energy of that shadow just burst out all of a sudden. And this is how the shadow shows itself in overreactions.
Mm.
Or in denial of, say, someone gives you a compliment, yeah, and we will say, "Oh no, no, that is not me." Someone will tell you something not so nice, and you say, yeah, I think they understand me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. And psychologist says that it's more disrupting to find that you have profound nobility of character than to find out that you're a bum. The Robert Johnson. This is it. We avoid it. But this avoidance and these sudden changes in behavior show that it's a shadow element there that you have to repress too long.
Excellent.
And then you sit down and you ask yourself, now, what was it that so upset me?
Thank you. And also maybe, I think those are the key things, but there's also when you are aware of certain patterns or characteristics that have been with you for some time, that you can't shake, maybe an addiction, maybe a minor addiction, but a kind of an addiction that you would like to be free from, but you can't. The French word for addiction is dépendance.
Yes.
Dependency, or sort of codependency. So maybe being aware of these sort of patterns, which we can almost take for granted as inevitable, but we also can see how they hold us back. So interpreting those, I think you've helped us a lot to be able to understand how we begin to come to self-knowledge in that way. Another question, would be, once we've begun then to do this work of facing the shadow, how do we bring the shadow out of the shadows? Because the shadow likes to hide, and we like sometimes to collaborate with hiding it, keeping it in the shadows.
Yeah.
How do we bring it out into the light?
By actually recognizing it. You were talking about addictions, which is a plaster on the wound. You're trying to feel better, but the wound is still there. So it is the recognizing of the wound, yeah, and then to accept that wound. And in a way, you say, that was then, that wound was caused then. That is not now. So this mantra, this was then, this is now. Yeah, but it is the courage actually to accept that it's there, that you feel unlovable, and then you have to tell yourself, yeah, I know, but then you ask the other side, well, there are lots of people who do love me now. So doesn't that count for more? It is this accepting it was the past, and it doesn't have to influence you, and it won't unless, but you have to acknowledge it's there. Yeah?
Sure, yeah. Thank you. And finally, what, looking ahead to the next 40 years of meditation, would you say that how would you ask somebody? How would you respond to somebody who asked you, "Okay, I'm going through a difficult time in my meditation. It's quite dry. I think the shadow is beating me up quite a bit, and I want to persevere with it. I know that and I need my meditation group, and I need various ways of getting support, and listening to Kim helps, and so on." But then one would say to you, "But will the shadow ever go away? Will I be free from it?" How would you respond to that?
Well, I was once asked, in fact, that question when they said, "Well, you've been on the path for a long time, so I'm sure your shadow has disappeared now." And I laughed and I said, "Well, to use a different metaphor, there is always another skeleton in the cupboard waiting to come out." And it's a lifelong journey, but we have to remember what Jung said, that 90% of the shadow is gold. The things we often repress are intuition, nonsense. That's not a rational thought. How do you know that? Well, I just know. And that's been pushed in the shadow because everyone said nonsense. Well, you want that intuition out. That's the mouthpiece for your true self. Even love and joy can be pushed down there. The assertiveness, we've talked about that, but often creativity is there. One of my last shadows I met about 4 years ago, and one of the last bits of one particular shadow, not my last shadow, unfortunately. I love pottery, and anyone who comes to my house will know that. There are pottery, real pottery things. And I thought, I've projected this out. This is something good. And then I remembered that I wasn't allowed to do anything working with clay as a kiddie because that was messy. That was very messy. And Mom didn't have the time to tidy up. So what Shanita and I did about 3-4 years ago, she said, "Come on, Mom, we're going to a pottery class." And we went to a pottery class. And 2 things I discovered was how wonderful it was to be messy, because you cannot but get messy when you sit at the wheel. And secondly, I could do it. I could do it. I could throw pots, and it worked. And that shadow now, I can leave it there. It's happy. I say, "When couldn't you?" Well, I can't do it now, but I can do it. It's there. And it's creativity like that, because it was frowned upon. What would we do without creativity? Yeah? What would we do with all these ones? And do always remember, that is so much in the shadow. Yeah? And our unmet needs, you're not loved? Nonsense. Of course you're loved. Of course you are esteemed. And by now you are secure. I love these stories of Shankar often watches television, which I can't, programs about people doing jobs in India or Latin America. And they do what we would call a very humble job. But they have a tremendous amount of self-esteem out of that. Yeah? So it doesn't matter what you do. If you enjoy doing it, that's your esteem you get from others and from yourself.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, Kim, thank you. I think we will leave it for now on that note. I'm sure you will come back to a Contemplative Path website and and teach us. We're in the process of beginning to plan a new digital restructuring of how we teach and work, and how the community is nourished, and how we share the gift of meditation all online. That's become one of the fruits of this pandemic, I think, is that we've become aware of the importance of these questions. So I'm sure we will ask you again to come and teach. But we've known each other for many years now, and
don't remind us both for how long.
I'm not ashamed of it.
At least years.
But I think part of friendship is being able, as you rightly said, being able to see each other's shadows. So and friendship is recognizing the shadow in yourself and in the other person, and without being frightened off by it or running away from it. And I think you've really helped us all to not to be frightened of the shadow, and that the fear of the shadow is the only problem, is the only major problem that the shadow produces is our fear of dealing with it and looking at it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and you've given us great insight and humor and depth of your own journey and of your reading and study, and so many thanks. We'll let you get back to the mess of making pots, and I suppose you can't make omelets without breaking eggs, and you can't make beautiful, elegant, shaped pots without creating a mess. And
exactly.
Maybe that's why the cosmos comes out of chaos, and
indeed,
over and over again. But listen, Kim, thank you again so much. You've given us a wonderful series of teachings, and which build up into a great gift, which will enrich many people for a long time. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.